You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
It is time for Ask a Guide, and this is Ask a Guide number 2. Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is, a short episode that we do once in a while on Addressing Gettysburg, in which we ask questions that we've solicited from you, and we ask them to licensed battlefield guides so that you can get an answer that you can trust and rely on. Today on Ask a Guide, we have our buddy Bob Steenstra, and for the first time of what I'm sure will be many times, is licensed battlefield guide and author Tim Smith. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
Welcome.
Welcome, Tim.
And welcome to you, Bob.
Well, thank you,
as well. Okay, so we got a lot of questions this time here. This seems to be a pretty popular thing upload here when we do these Ask a Guide. So let's get right to it here. J. Neely 1777 says, "Hey Matt, there is a myth out there that the Battle of Gettysburg was fought over the Confederates going to Gettysburg seeking a shipment of shoes at the shoe factory. As Gettysburg was a viable city with many stores and supplies, how did the shoe myth grow so popular? We know these troops on both sides needed supplies and, of course, shoes, but it seems to be out there as a reason the battle took place at Gettysburg was simply over Confederates seeking shoes. Perhaps the licensed battlefield guides can shed some light on this myth." Tim, the shoe myth.
Well, it's fascinating. Probably, being a tour guide and taking lots of people around the battlefield is probably the one most persistent myth about the battle that exists. As a matter of fact, it was even an answer on not Final Jeopardy, but on Jeopardy. They actually brought that question up, what battle was fought, because, one of the sides was looking for shoes. So, basically, the shoe story myth started with the memoirs of Harry Heath, a Confederate general, who mentioned that he was coming to Gettysburg to get shoes. And his official report, he mentions that he needs supplies, especially shoes. I guess at the time that Harry Heath's book became popular, the people who were talking about Gettysburg, early tour guides and people who were writing about the Battle of Gettysburg were interested in the fact that he said that he was coming to Gettysburg to get shoes. The biggest problem with it is that Henry Heath is mistaken. The Southern Army did not concentrate on the town of Gettysburg because they were looking for shoes. That's readily apparent in the written record. I mean, when Robert E. Lee wrote his letter to Jefferson Davis explaining why he brought on the Battle of Gettysburg, he said, that when he learned that the Northern Army were advancing, he ordered for the concentration of his army at Gettysburg. And then in his more lengthy official report of the battle, he explained the details that led them to concentrate at Gettysburg. And it had nothing to do with shoes. I would just say that the shoe myth is an oversimplification, as they stated in the question, of one of the reasons why the Southern Army invaded Pennsylvania, to gather supplies and provisions. The other problem with the shoe myth is that we don't have a shoe factory.
Right.
And
what was the main industry here?
Carriage making was a big industry prior to the outbreak of the Civil War. And I would say that like many other towns, especially near the border of the North and the South, that, industry and commerce was really hurting at the time of the battle. But we do have people in town that make shoes. There's no major factory of shoes. There's no supply of shoes, but we have cobblers like any other town. One of my associates at the Adams County Historical Society, Dr. Charles Gladfelter, actually took it a little bit further. He examined how many cobblers were in the town of Gettysburg and compared it to other major towns in the area. And his analysis was that there's no more shoe making ability in Gettysburg than any other town in the region. So the thing about the shoes is we really don't have them. And then the other thing is that, when Henry Heath's division is approaching Gettysburg on June 30th, John B. Gordon's brigade had already passed through the town on June 26th.
Right.
In the book by Wilbur Nye, Here Come the Rebels, Wilbur Nye actually suggests that when Gordon's brigade passed through the town, that the division commander, Juba Early, actually sent a message back to someone in the rear saying, "Hey, do you know there was a shoe factory in town, but I didn't get a chance to visit it, so maybe you want to check that out." And just, guides ran with that for a while, but that is based on absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
So that's somebody just pulling that out of thin air.
And the idea that Juba Early would even be in contact with someone from AP Hills Corps is ridiculous. Ewell would go through Ewell, and Ewell would report to Lee, and then Lee would send a message. There's no message between brigades and different Army Corps. It's kind of ridiculous.
Right.
The whole concept.
So you mentioned cobblers. Was John Burns a cobbler?
Yeah, John Burns was one of the cobblers. John Burns had a bunch of different occupations at the time of the Civil War and, prior to the Civil War. At different points, he was town constable. He worked for the Gettysburg Water Company. I get the feeling he was the one who pumped the water out of the wells into the pond. And, of course, he worked for David Kendall Hart, who had a shoe store, I should say a shoemaking enterprise on Baltimore Street. And so that's where the cobbler comes in.
And he was the president of the town council.
Kendall Hart, yes.
Kendall Hart.
Very good.
Let's just talk for a minute, though, about the importance of shoes for the Army of Northern Virginia at this point in the campaign.
Okay.
Because one of the reasons I think that the myth is somewhat lasting is because that is a need. I mean, there are stories of Confederate veterans stopping and taking footwear off of dead Yankees during the campaign, and even during the battle on the first day in particular. So could you speak to that, Tim?
Well, a couple interesting things, and again, I do believe that the shoe story's prevalence is an oversimplification of the Southern Army's need for supplies, especially shoes. Also, of course, they invade Pennsylvania, they need horses. Also, they're stealing horses from the rich Pennsylvania countryside. But a couple illustrations of that. And when I say that, it's also mentioned that the Northern Army needs shoes as well.
Okay.
After the Battle of Gettysburg was over, one of the reasons that General Meade wanted to march south to Frederick, Maryland, and then over the mountains to oppose the Southerners along the Potomac River was he needed shoes. And he had sent a message to the Army Supply to have shoes brought to Frederick to resupply some of the troops in the Army. And also, on June 26th, when the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment was defeated north of the town of Gettysburg, and about 170 men were captured in the fields along the Goldenville Road north of the town. They were taken to Hunterstown on June 27th. Juba Early paroled them and sent them back to Harrisburg. And they walked from Hunterstown up across towards Harrisburg, and near Shippensburg, they were recaptured by Edward Johnson's division. Edward Johnson's division made the 170 men take off their shoes and give them to Southern soldiers, and then they were forced to march barefoot to Harrisburg. And that's an illustration of that. Captured soldiers get their shoes taken.
So, is it fair to say then that the battle was fought over shoes thing? That shoes is more symbolic of that the Confederates are up here looking for supplies?
Yes, that's what I suggest.
Okay.
But if you think about important supplies, shoes would be one of the more important things.
I would say, yeah.
Many people have also pointed out that a large portion of the Army, the Southern Army or whatever, is in need of shoes. And, we laugh because there's not like different sizes of shoes. They make like small, medium, large shoes.
Right.
And a lot of people have shoes that aren't comfortable. But apparently in Virginia, most of the roads are soft and, dirt.
Okay.
And you can walk on those roads barefoot. And then the Southern Army invades Pennsylvania, and we have turnpikes with macadam crushed stone on them, and it's not so easy to march on these roads.
Oh, yeah. I never even thought of that.
Yeah. It's an appealing story, too. The PBS documentary begins with something like the greatest battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere began as a fight over shoes, which is really not doing justice to the history. But it's an appealing story. I remember Greg Coco in On the Bloodstained Field. I don't know if it was 1 or 2, but he tells a story. I think it was a guy from the 1st Massachusetts. There was a skirmish, and earlier, a sutler's wagon had been raided to get it out of the way. A sutler is a entrepreneur who follows the army with selling different supplies that soldiers would like, and shoes was one. And there were a pair of white canvas shoes, And this one Yankee had taken them and had written his initials on them, on both of them, on the front. And then a little bit later, like this all takes place within, I think, 36 hours. The guy who had gotten the shoes is dead, and a Confederate takes the shoes, and they're very noticeable shoes, according to Coco, because they have the guy's initials on it. Mm-hmm. And then at another skirmish within the next 36 hours, that Confederate is dead, and a Yankee gets the shoes back, and that guy dies within 36 hours, and so it goes back and forth like that. Yeah. So there's something about it's so human to want a pair of shoes.
Yeah. You know? I mean, walking around barefoot on various types of surfaces, even out in a field of what looks like soft grass, that's not like out there, that farm behind us there. Mm-hmm. You know, that grass that's like straw. That hurts. In the summertime, and you go walking out in that barefoot. Do you ever do that?
No.
You don't want to.
You're such a tenderfoot, man.
No.
You don't want to. All right. JDSW20 from Instagram asks, hello again. My question for the guides is, what unit, either side, does he believe is the most neglected or not discussed enough?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I don't know if I think about specific units that are not discussed enough. One thing I always like to point out, that if you count like every regiment to battle on North and South, and every cavalry unit and every artillery unit, you know, an organization, we might be talking about 500 different kinds of organizations. And I think my complaint would be that we seem to talk about the same ones over and over and over and over again, and there are a few hundred units that are neglected. And I always look at it as if each unit that fought here has its own distinctive story to tell and has something to bring to the table. Obviously, there's an issue with accounts. There are some units where we have like 10 different accounts by men in that unit that are very good about what they did during the battle. Mm-hmm. And there are units where we don't have a single account of that unit from the battle whatsoever. And so I think like Benning's brigade, Semmes brigade of Georgia that fought on the second day, there are very few accounts by men in that brigade. And so when you have these units and there's no accounts that talk about what they did, their role in the battle is minimized by historians, because we only write about what we have available to us to write about.
Okay.
And then, of course, you know, popular history, like when I was a kid, the 1st Minnesota was the be-all, end-all unit. As a matter of fact, the 1st Minnesota Infantry is the only regiment mentioned by name in the electric map. And now, of course, everybody knows that the 20th Maine is the most popular regiment currently. Right. That everyone talks about them. And I always wonder, like in 10 years from now, what regiment, or 20 years, what regiment might be the regiment that'll come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden people start highlighting their role in the battle.
Yeah.
So my comment wouldn't be that I think there's one unit that has a really important role that's been neglected. My comment is that there's a bunch of units that are rarely discussed, and it would make me happy if like all the units that fought at the battle were discussed evenly, which of course is unrealistic.
Yeah. Well, the fighting wasn't even either. So.
Can I take a stab at this?
Yeah, go ahead, take a stab.
Just trying to get a sense of the question.
You want me to ask it again?
No, I think I got it.
Right.
Tim is absolutely correct that the 20th Maine is the focus. Sometimes today people are surprised by the 1st Minnesota. Yeah, I'll tell people I think this is a more inspiring story, actually, than the 20th Maine. And they say, oh, really? I never heard of that. Well, that's because Ted Turner didn't talk about it, or Shara didn't write about it. But let me take a stab at it this way, because Tim's absolutely correct. But this, I think it's the 77th New York up there on Powers Hill. Does anyone really want to read about that, right? Okay. So there are some regiments that played a key role in the battle that are invisible to most people if they have just a very shallow reading of the battle. So let me take a stab at some of those, okay? And jump in here at any time, all right? 137th New York.
I was just going to say, stole my thunder.
Colonel David Ireland, Culp's Hill, night of July 2nd. If you like the story of the 20th Maine, an outnumbered force occupying the flank of the Union Army, getting flanked and holding their ground, there's a story there. So do some more research on that. If I seed anything for you, Tim, just jump in. It's not my intent to get into detail about this.
Go ahead, Bob.
We're probably going to have podcast about any one of these.
Well, but you can touch on anything right now.
Okay, the 16th Maine on the first day on Oak Ridge, right there near where the Mummasburg Road is. This is near the Peace Light for our listeners. They are the regiment in Robinson's division that is going to buy time for everyone else to retreat. And they take, Tim, you're much better with numbers and things. I'm going to say 73% casualties, somewhere in there.
And they have a huge percentage of men that are captured.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do they do with their flag?
Rip their flag to shreds and give the pieces to individuals in a unit, and then those individuals carry the shreds of the flag through prison camp, to avoid the flag being captured by the enemy.
I think that's a nice story that's largely forgotten.
Yeah.
The 17th Maine in the wheat field, one of the last units of de Trobriand's brigade of Birney's division of Sickles' corps. Sickles just moved out there. Sorry, folks. I just inadvertently knocked my microphone away from me like Sickles went out to the peach orchard. And the 17th Maine is going to hold the position, get driven back and countercharge. And at one point, their colonel is going to even order them to fix bayonets. Kind of reminiscent of the 20th Maine. So these are just some to seed your listener. Maybe they want to do a little more research on some of these units.
So basically, there's a lot that goes into what makes the popular ones popular, aside from what they just what they did.
I would say that one thing is interesting, is that the units that are more popular today are the ones that are more written about, obviously. Right. So, people have said to me many times that history is written by the winners. And I always am quick to say no. History is written by the people who write about it.
Yep. All right.
So we have to look to the written record. So it's hard for us we look at a unit that maybe sacrificed themselves and lost a lot of men. And, if you lose a high percentage of your men, there's less people left to write about it. And if everybody in the unit survives, there's more people to write about it.
Right.
So sometimes the more popular units are the ones that have survivors.
Yeah, right. Or if your colonel is a professor, he knows how to write pretty well.
If you write well.
Yeah. Okay. The Great Tronetti from Instagram, he asked, and I like this question because this is a question that I find a lot of people are confused by. As guides, who are you employed by, and how did you get there?
How did we become guides?
So I guess a lot of people are confused. They confuse bless you. Was that a cough? Oh, it's a cough. Okay. They confuse guides and rangers. They refer to rangers as guides and guides as rangers. But they're two distinctly different things, and what makes them distinct is how they're employed.
Yeah, which it's interesting about being a guide. I've been a guide for a long time, and when I became a guide, the process was different than it is today when you become a guide. And the simple answer to the question is that guides are self-employed.
Okay,
and that in today's world, once you're a guide, and of course to become a guide, you have to pass a series of qualifications that are placed by the federal government to obtain a guiding license. And the process has changed over the years. When I became a guide, and I took the guide test in 1991, became a guide in 1992, the process was you just took a written test. And if you got a 76% on the written test, then you went on to the next level, which was a training session. And then at the end of the training session, you had an appointment and you took a guide and a ranger on a tour of the battlefield. And if they thought you were decent enough, you passed the test. And I freely admit to the modern people that want to be guides or the people that have become guides lately, that the test was a lot easier when I became a guide. Not that I, feel like I wouldn't be able to pass it now. It's just that, I realized that I took it at a different time, and over the years it has changed. Now, once you get your license and you're self-employed and you have a license, and there are restrictions and rules that you have to abide by.
Like what? Give us some of those.
Like you have to do, depending on what your guide category is, and your licensing fee is based on your guide category each year, then you have to do a certain amount of tours. You have to do a percentage of bus tours to car tours. There's a ratio of tours you have to do, and
uniform. We have to
you have to wear a uniform, you know, and there are uniform regulations. And
the fee that we can charge is set.
Yes, that's right. That's the most important. I think that's the number one most important thing, that the regulation, the people who invented the regulations, and they were invented a long time ago, like 1915, 1916, was they set the fee so that people can't overcharge for their, and you know, the fear is that if there was no fee, then some people would be charging $300 for a tour, and some people would be charging, undercutting each other. So there's a fee set. But who do we work for? You can work out of the Gettysburg Foundation Museum building, which many guides do. And many guides, that's all they do, is they work out of the Gettysburg Foundation. It's set up by the National Park Service. But some guides work out of the Heritage Center. Some guys only do horse tours. Some guys hand their business card out and only do tours through the bed and breakfasts. Some guys just book their own tours. So I think as time has gone by, the variety of venues for which the guides work has changed.
Right. Like I do the vast majority of my tours for bicycles, for Getty's Bike Tour is one of the promoters of this podcast,
greatest
advertiser
businesses
anyway. And Tim has done tours for Getty's Bike Tours as well in the past. So yeah.
But now, so you were mentioning like most of your tours are through Getty's Bike, and you were mentioning guys do like only horse tours and stuff. But how does that? Don't they have those ratios that they have to meet?
I think if I understand it. I think the National Park Service, it has one person that administers the rules of the guides. Over the years, as things change, they've kind of like slightly bent the rules. But I think the ratio is basically created to be a bus ratio. See,
okay. Because everybody wants to do the bus.
Tour guides make more money if they do a tour of 50 people than they do if they do 2 people. And I think I specialize in doing school buses of 8th graders. Okay. And if I can just do buses of 8th graders constantly, I would do it and not do any tours with regular people. I think the ratio was created so that there would be a availability of guides, so that when the random person walks in off the street and goes to the visitor center, there's always guides available that'll give tours to a couple in their car. Okay. And so the park wants to make sure that there are guides available. So by putting a ratio on it, if you do 100 8th grade school buses a year, and I do more than 100, that I also have to meet my ratio by doing general tours to the general public.
Right, okay.
For especially tours like bicycle, horseback, you don't get many bus-sized groups. So the ratio is very easy to maintain there. By the way, Tim, you are now knighted or whatever. Well, that's not mixed metaphors. Saint Tim. I don't know if in 29 years of giving tours, I have ever heard someone that their specialty was and what they would best want to do is 8th grade.
The 8th graders are my people.
School bus. All right.
What makes them your people?
Well, one thing, I guess I had gravitated towards it because I noticed that a lot of people did not like to do tours with 8th graders.
Wonder why?
And so I just sort of, there was an availability for someone who was looking to do those tours. Yeah. And, I think in the older days, some of the guides hated the 8th graders. And I always asked them, well, why do you do them? Because they pay more money, so maybe some of it is more that, hey, I get more money for doing the 8th graders than I do for taking 2 people out on a car tour. And, you just have to, sometimes, they're going to be a little excited. Sometimes, they might be a little disrespectful.
Yeah. They might fall off the Pennsylvania monument.
Yeah, they might. Or climb over the edge of the Pennsylvania monument.
Right. And then fall.
So, they're 8th graders are going to do things. But, you just learn how to deal with it.
So if someone is thinking that he or she wants to become a guide, what advice would you give them? Especially, and granted, it was different when you took the test, but from what you know of the test now, what would you? What advice?
I think I think the most important part of, the process if you're trying to become a guide is to pass the written test.
Oh, yeah.
And so I would say this, that, all the things I did, the most valuable thing I did was to memorize the order of battle.
Okay.
So
down to what level?
Well, I guess I was a little crazy. But you should know it down to brigade level.
Okay.
I knew every regiment in the battle.
Okay.
I always brag. One time I knew all the colonels of all the regiments.
Jesus.
I don't anymore.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. Don't have the retention.
Uh-huh.
But, before I was a tour guide, I was a truck driver, and I would drive around my truck, and I had a cassette tape, and I just had myself, reading off the order of battle, and I just memorized the order of battle.
So you would read off the order of battle on a cassette and then listen back?
Yeah, I
love it.
did it.
That's a great idea.
But by memorizing the order of battle, all the regiments always fight within their brigades. So once you know where each brigade is, the brigades generally fight in a division. Right. And then you know where each division is. So I think when you're reading about the battle, there's so many units and it's so confusing. And just by knowing the order of battle, and knowing where all the units are at any given time on the entire battlefield really helps you when you're reading about the battle and learning about the battle.
Yeah.
So it's a simple thing. Now, obviously, some people are tour guides because they had a good memory. Right. And I say that's why I'm a tour guide, because I had the ability to memorize stuff and retain it. And other people don't have the ability to retain information like that. So there might be a different way that you want to go about taking the test.
Does personality matter at all?
Well, once you get past the written part of the test, then you have to go through a training. Well, they have a little training session, and then there's a one-on-one interview currently with a panel of rangers and guides and the person who's trying to become a guide. And then, of course, you have to take, a tour of the battlefield with a ranger and a guide and show you can do it.
Right.
So obviously, personality comes into play, but not until a different stage. Now, we used to have, again, the test has changed over the years and how they deliver the different stages of the test. But for a while, they just made it based on whoever had the highest scores. Then, they took like the top 10 for candidacy to the next level. The problem with that was the people who can memorize information and pass a written test maybe are not the same people that can relate that information or have a personality.
Yeah, they're probably bookworms, and bookworms don't have personalities usually, and they don't relate to people.
Always.
Well, a good deal of them.
A couple things about this. When I first became aware of licensed battlefield guides, I had just moved here from California. I was spending my first day at Gettysburg, and I saw a guy dressed as we are. It turns out it was Fred Hawthorne. And since I had just gotten a teaching job...
For the people that can't see, we're all dressed like pilgrims right now.
Sorry, light blue shirts.
You mean dressed as a guide?
Like a guide,
right. Not as we're dressed right now.
Anyway, so I asked Fred, who are you? What do you do? Because it seemed like a pretty cool thing to do. And he told me what guides were. And then I said, well, how hard is the test? What do I need to do? And he gave me a couple pieces of advice. One was to know everything at least to the brigade level. He said it's really difficult. Now, Tim's right. It's not as difficult, or is more difficult today than it was. But it was really difficult for a person like me who just was coming from nothing. And I found out about this in July, and I took the test in November of '89 and passed it. So it was pretty intense study to do that. But
so you just
the
made
brigade
your 30th.
level is what he told me. Yeah, I just passed my 30th anniversary on November 3rd.
Congratulations.
Of passing the exam anyway. And the other thing I would say to people who might be thinking about this, and that would be that our Guide Association website has a page or whatever about becoming a guide, how to become a guide. And I think the Park Service website might as well. But there is an article, Tim, maybe you can help me with this. The Civil War Monitor did it, I think.
Yeah, I remember that.
I think it was 2013. Which exact issue, I'm not sure. I'm thinking maybe it's May. But it's a big, almost 30-page article about becoming a guide. I think it was titled, "Think Gaining Entrance into Harvard is Difficult. Try gaining access into Gettysburg's elite cadre of licensed battlefield guides." And it goes on about the process. And so fairly recent article.
And I don't know about you, Bob, but when I took the guide test, 130 people took the written test. 30 of them passed the written test and 10 became guides.
It was very similar when I took it. I think it was 120 and 12 became guides or something like that. Yeah.
I hope they realize that the audience, the people, are more interested in being entertained now than what you know. You know what I mean? Like it's changing the younger people coming up.
That's part of the process, and the park is aware, and the guides are aware that has to be the case. Yeah. That's why when Tim and I did it, you took the written and then the oral, and I believe they gave you 2 chances to pass the oral.
Yes.
I think about 75% of the people would fail the oral on the first time and then get a second chance to do it. So that was all designed for, we understand you need to be able to communicate.
Mm.
And then, you know, I think a lot of people in this procedure, to me, there's a lot of pressure. Mm. So let's say you know the battle really well, you're even a good tour guide, you can even relate the information well, but you have to do it while you're driving with a ranger and a park tour guide, you know, and it takes it's a 2-hour tour.
And you have to drive safely.
You have to stop
fully at stop signs.
We've had candidates.
He looks at me. Did I tell you what my only negative comment was on my exam?
That's why I said that.
I had just moved from California.
We had a guy drive through candidate drive through a stop sign. We had one turn the wrong way on Reynolds Avenue one time taking the test. So we had a guide candidate. These are people that didn't pass.
Right.
Almost hit a parked car. You know.
Yeah.
And you can imagine all these things are going through your head and a lot of pressure, and then you have to drive.
Yeah. And you're driving someone else's car.
Yeah.
Well, in the guide, as I remember, they let you drive your own car.
Oh, that's nice.
During the test, that's true. What we do day to day is drive other people's cars.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So hopefully that helps anybody out there who's thinking that they might want to become a guide. Anna _ Storm asks, what is your favorite part of the battle/battlefield to talk about?
Well, you know, I generally, whatever part of the battlefield I'm on, I really like it. I do drift back and forth between places I really enjoy giving tours, subjects or parts of the battlefield I give tours on. Obviously, I wrote a book called Devil's Den, A History and Guide, and I'm well known for giving tours of Devil's Den, but I do that a lot. Mm-hmm. You know, I do Wheatfield tours. I do a lot of Culp's Hill tours. I always seem to enjoy doing tours of Culp's Hill. And maybe for one of the reasons Bob mentioned earlier, that a lot of people aren't as in tune to Culp's Hill and might not even know about the 137th New York or General George Sears Green, you know, and Culp's Hill for years has been like an optional part of the tour route.
Right.
So when you take people there, a lot of times it's their only time they've been there. Of course, I give lots of walking tours of the town of Gettysburg and talk about not just the civilians during the battle, which is an interesting subject, but the actual fighting in the streets of town. And I enjoy doing that a lot. I think I enjoy getting out of the car and giving tours, walking tours of just one specific site, you know, no matter what area of the battlefield it is.
Hashtag get out of the car. What about you, Bob?
You know, it's funny how things change over the years. I can remember when the Soviet Union collapsed, tying into that current event. Today,
you also remember when the Tsar was dethroned.
I'm not that old, man. Today, my favorite place is the cemetery.
Okay.
And to talk about how important those words of Lincoln were at the cemetery, because they resonate to a time when we're a very divided country, and when government of the people, by the people, and for the people is being challenged. So, yeah, that's where what shall I say, gets me up out of bed in the morning, right?
So, and you said that's recently. What was it before?
The wheat field, I really
excellent
enjoy just because it's so intricate.
Yeah.
Tim, thank you, because those little mini walking tours that you give within a tour, easier on a bicycle because you can go either direction.
Yeah.
The Devil's Den. And I'm saying thank you to you because I use your book so much for that. There's if you have kids in there that are asking about ghosts and things, which I don't really like to get into, but there's a couple of stories you can get into. The P. Noel or Noel. How do you pronounce that one, Tim?
Well, I think locally it's Noel.
Okay.
Noel. Noel.
Okay.
But, Noel. People say Noel.
And we'll have Tim back sometime for a podcast on Devil's Den and his book.
Absolutely.
I was going to say on pronunciations of names.
Well, we could do that too. I'd like that.
Since I'm from Balmer. I know how to pronounce things.
Yeah. So
that's one I like to do. I like to do the first day as well, because that's another sometimes neglected part of the battlefield. The damn Dutch, I don't think are so damn.
Or Dutch.
11th Corps or Dutch either. If you think of Dutch as my ancestry being from the Netherlands, they're not mostly. But there was a guy who broke into Spandau prison to get his mentor released. This is a famous prison in Berlin after a failed democratic revolution. So there are some brave men in the 11th Corps. And they broke and they had to retreat. But anyway.
Yeah. I remember you told me a story when you were in college, you tried to get into the Spandau Ballet. But you tried to break into that. All right, whatever. It was a cheesy joke.
How much have you had to drink?
None yet. I just this water here. Okay, so and if anybody cares, my favorite part of the battlefield is the porta-johns in the corner of Wheatfield Road. And Sedgwick, what is that? Sedgwick there? Because by that point I have to pee. So thank God they're there. No, I think my favorite part is Oak Hill. I don't know why, but I always find myself going there and just sitting there. So there's something pulling me there. I don't know why. It's not necessarily the battle part of it. It's just my favorite spot. We shall find out someday, I'm sure. All right, Quinn, 2477, says, on our last guided tour, we talked about the Lost Company of the 20th Maine. I had never heard of them before. Can you talk a bit about them and what role they played during the fight?
Well, Company B of the 20th Maine, basically when Vincent's brigade was assigned Little Round Top and moved into position, the 44th New York, for instance, which was one of the regiments there, through one of their companies, Company B, I think it is, also out in front to the Devil's Kitchen, and the 20th Maine through Company B of their regiment. And of course, each regiment has, 10 companies. Through a company out towards the Tandytown Road, beyond the woods on the backside of Little Round Top, east of Little Round Top, to just watch and make sure that the Southern Army did not outflank that position. Right. I always find it interesting, think about this, that the Vincent's brigade came from the area of the Baltimore Pike behind, along Rock Creek, and moved a couple miles to get into position on Little Round Top. And of course, Law's brigade of Longstreet's Corps actually marched 26 miles that morning, marched all the way out to the end of, Seminary Ridge, Warfield Ridge, into position. And then they launched an attack up and over Big Round Top. And when it came to the two units meeting in battle, they met almost exactly. Yeah. Which is kind of odd. You'd think one unit would be like a half a mile beyond the other or something like that. But no, they met exactly. Yeah. And they did send, the 20th Maine sent one company out into the open fields east of Little Round Top near the Tandytown Road, just to make sure the Southern Army weren't swinging troops around, as General Hood would have preferred that they do. Right. So the company went out there. We don't have really much evidence of how far they went out towards the Tandytown Road. But at some point, they returned to the edge of the woods where there was a stone wall, and they positioned behind the stone wall. And during the fight between the 20th Maine and the 15th Alabama, that's illustrated in the novel Kill Rangers, or the movie Gettysburg, if you're familiar with that, they just kind of hovered on the outside of the battlefield. And then at the end of the battle, after the 20th Maine charged into the 15th Alabama, Company B came out from their exposed position behind a stone wall and charged into, or fired a volley into the fleeing Confederates. And actually, I would just say it's much ado about nothing. But, they put a monument, a marker to the spot near the wall where Company B was behind. Personally, I find it hard to believe that they were actually at that position during the entire fight, because when you swing around where the 15th Alabama fought, there's not much room between the area of the 20th Maine and that stone wall. And if they are right there where the company marker says they are, where they said they are in the speeches associated with that marker, then they're hiding behind that stone wall within really close range behind the Southern infantry, which is interesting in itself. Oh, one thing before I let Bob take over here, because I'm sure he wants to chime in. There are other company markers around the battlefield, but that is unusual. Most of the monuments are regimental monuments to the groups of 300 men that fought in the battle, and a company is about 30 men. The United States sharpshooters have monuments to the various companies of the 1st and 2nd United States sharpshooters all over the field. And on Culp's Hill, there's a company marker. I think it's Company F of the 2nd Wisconsin has a company marker. And there's a monument, there's a marker to a company in the 60th New York on the side of Culp's Hill of Green's Brigade. Okay. So there are other company markers, but it is unusual to have just a marker to one company.
Now, real quick, Bob, because I just want to, before I forget this. So so Company B is out there. Now, in the Ken Burns, back to Ken Burns, because a lot of people watch this, and this is where they get a lot of their information from. They say that Chamberlain assumed Company B had been wiped out because they heard gunfire. Do you remember this part?
My memory is that Chamberlain doesn't hear from Company B throughout the course of the fight until the bayonet charge. And the Confederates that are retreating back towards that wall will then receive fire from Company B.
Right.
And that'll help spread the panic that's going to cause
but so he doesn't write them off as wiped out.
He just hasn't heard from them.
Okay.
And I think the assumption is maybe they were captured, because if they were sent out there to protect his left flank, which is reasonable, it's typically what a company is going to do, why was it that the Confederates were able to get into the flank?
Right.
Okay. So I don't know this, but it would be reasonable to assume something happened to Company B.
Okay.
And Tim mentioned the U.S. sharpshooters. I believe there were about a dozen or so men of the U.S. sharpshooters that had also collected with Captain
Company
Morrill's
A.
Company
That was my
B.
second question.
Yeah,
and
that's
they
true.
were behind that wall too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was that second you said?
I believe so.
Yes.
I'm not positive. Okay.
Yeah, because the 2nd United States sharpshooters were actually formed in sort of an advanced line out in front of Little Round Top and along from the slopes of Big Round Top down across through what we call the Slider Farm. And when they fell back, I think William C. Oates says that the company on the right went around both sides of Big Round Top as they retreated. So whoever went around the east side of Big Round Top would have ended up with Company B.
Right. By the way, parts of the battlefield to go to, that Slider Farm is really cool too.
It's pristine.
It's pristine. There's company markers there from some Maine units and others of the U.S. sharpshooters out there.
I got to go out there.
There's a hiking trail that goes through. The Boy Scouts have one called, I think it's the Billy Yank Trail. It's about a 10-mile hike that starts at the Visitor Center and ends you at the Angle Visitor Center, and it goes right through the Slider property as well. So.
All right. Central Virginia historian is back with a brand spanking new question. He asks, did Richard Ewell really get shot in the wooden leg, or is that just another fib by John B. Gordon?
That's awesome. And of course, the answer would be, we don't know.
We don't know.
Do we know when John B. Gordon is telling the actual fact, or John B. Gordon, or maybe whoever helps him write his accounts is writing it for him? That's a good. There's so many parts of John B. Gordon's reminiscence of the Civil War. It's one of my favorite books to read through. That you're just you're shaking your head, and like his account of the fighting at the Sunken Lane, in Antietam, or obviously the Barlow Gordon incident.
Right.
But that is, if I remember correctly, that is the only source for this event.
Okay,
so I thought, the question I like is, okay, because sometimes it doesn't bother me whether a story, I don't get caught up in whether a story is true or not.
Right.
We have the story. It was told by John B. Gordon. So, whether he's making it up or not, it doesn't matter.
It's part of the record,
it's
whether
part
it's
of
true.
The historical record.
Yeah.
So my question then is, where did this take place? I think there's a painting. I don't remember what artist did it, but it's the square of Gettysburg, and John B. Gordon and Richard Ewell are together, and it happens there. And of course, for those people who might not know the story, Richard Ewell and John B. Gordon are riding together supposedly on the evening of the first day of the battle, and they're talking about the situation, and all of a sudden Gordon hears a thud. And he turns to General Ewell and says, "Are you all right?" And he says, "Well, it doesn't hurt to be shot in the wooden leg."
That's a great story. I think Glenn Tucker has that. Glenn Tucker's High Tide at Gettysburg was one of the first books I read about this battle.
Okay.
He's such a good
great
writer.
Story.
Yeah.
But in this painting, they have the story as occurring in the square of Gettysburg.
Okay.
I always imagine that the story occurred on High Street, not far from the old jail property, in what is now the Presbyterian Church parking lot. And it's the very highest point in the town of Gettysburg. Incidentally, that's why it's called High Street.
Yes.
The highest point in town.
And is middle street?
I never knew that.
And he's looking out over Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, and he's contemplating the assault against Cemetery Hill in the evening of the first day, and he's hit.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Anything to add on that one, Bob?
No, and I'm glad you said that, because often, not always, but often I'll stop at that Presbyterian parking lot and I'm telling people about the jail, the school.
Let's tell the story there. Let's tell that story there.
That's a great, and I didn't know High Street was named for that. But it's been a long time since I've read The Road to Glory by Samuel J. Martin. But I was just looking through it this morning and realized that he tells of a story, and I was just looking for the source for it, of just before that. I'll quote this. This is page 210 of The Road to Glory.
Okay. Just right into that mic, Bob, not to the side of it there. Okay, go ahead.
Ewell wheeled his mount and headed back for Oak Hill. He was heading over to talk to Dole, but to rush troops to Dole's aid. He never saw the shell until it was upon him. With extraordinary luck, a Federal battery intercepted Ewell's path and scored a direct hit, the ball smashing into his horse's head. The detonation scattered deadly shell fragments throughout the area, wounding several soldiers, but miraculously missing Ewell. Sitting stoically in the saddle while his mutilated mare crumpled to her knees, Ewell waited until his only foot touched ground and then stepped neatly aside and quietly asked for a spare horse.
That's interesting. Try to put yourself in Ewell's shoe.
That's probably where I got that joke, Matt. Thank you, Tom.
It gets me every time. So that's a cool story, though. I never heard that about the horse getting his head blown off and Ewell just calmly stepping aside. Let's see. Instagrams, Scott _B_5.11.4. What names these people come up with. He dares you to pick one top reason why the Army of Northern Virginia lost the Battle of Gettysburg.
Well, you know what I'm going to say.
Give Pickett's quote?
Yes. I think the Yankees had something to do with it.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you shouldn't be charging across an open field at an entrenched position when cannons are firing at you.
That sounds like good advice.
Well put, Tim.
Yeah. Okay, so Tim says Union Army. Bob, what do you say?
God was against them.
God was against them.
Actually,
God's will.
And when Bob says that, he's not kidding. That's a reason that has been put forth by people as to the reason the Southern Army lost the battle. That the Southern Army did everything they could. That they were better trained. They were better led. Their tactics were good. It's just that there was something that kept them from actually breaking through the Union line.
The late Shelby Foote, featured in the Ken Burns documentary, his 3-volume history of the war, the section on Gettysburg is entitled "The Stars in Their Courses," a quote from the Bible, the Song of Deborah in the book of Judges, where after beating the infidels, they didn't call them infidels, but the Israelites are celebrating, and part of the praise that comes out is the stars in their courses. In other words, for them, they could say that God himself was fighting against them. But it's interesting, it's a Southern historian, Shelby Foote, who would use that as the title of that chapter on Gettysburg.
Yeah. Huh. All right. Makeitclique, or as I call her, Makeitclique. She asks, is there any evidence that people in the U.S. were aware that South Africa had already abolished slavery?
I don't know about South Africa, and it really depends upon your take in what abolishing slavery actually means.
Oh, interesting.
Because I can tell you this, that in the outbreak of the Civil War, the New York Times has a really neat series of articles on Russia abolishing serfdom.
Okay.
And comparing that to slavery. I think, across the world, there are different terms used for the institution of slavery. I think it's Brazil doesn't abolish slavery as they know it until 1880. So I think they're the last civilized country in the world to actually abolish slavery.
Okay.
But I would say that, we read the newspapers. We can look on newspapers.com, and you could put a subject into that and see how many papers that appeared in. I always find it interesting in how well versed the general public is on what's happening around the country and the world at that time through the articles in the newspapers that circulate amongst the Army. I mean, they have lots of downtime in the Army. There are lots of papers circulating with articles about current events and world news. And, either people are discussing those events or they're reading about them.
Right.
So I would say they're knowledgeable about what's taking place. Yes.
Okay. They probably did know. I mean, should we even mention that the United States was not the first nor the last country to have slavery? We didn't invent it. A lot of people, I think, seem to think that we're the only ones that had it. And I think it's kind of important to note that we fought a war to end it. Like, a lot of people died to end it, and other countries were able to do it through legislation. So, I mean, there is a kind of a problem there that you have to shed blood to end it, but it was ended and continued on in other countries beyond that, even to this day.
Yeah.
So, okay. A great one from dannymusclehed. Besides Lee, Chamberlain, Meade, and the other big names, were there any famous people who fought at Gettysburg or went on to become famous? So someone who was already famous, like when Elvis went into the Army, or, of course, he didn't fight, or people who became famous afterwards.
That's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of people that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg and then they crop up as being important characters in other events, and that's to a known extent or a lesser known extent. For instance, I guess this will be one. On Little Round Top, General Gouverneur Kimball Warren is the chief engineer of the Northern Army, and he has 3 staff officers with him, and one of his staff officers would go on to build the Brooklyn Bridge, Washington Roebling. Mm-hmm. So he's obviously much more famous for building the Brooklyn Bridge than he is for being a staff officer on Little Round Top with General Warren.
Right. Okay.
Do you have any Bob that comes to mind like that?
Yes. Oliver Otis Howard. Most people, unless they really are into the Civil War, won't recognize that name. But if you mention Howard University or the Freedmen's Bureau, which he headed after the Civil War. So he was obviously a prominent officer here, a corps commander, but he goes on to, I think, establish a little more reputation. The most obvious one, the guy Custer, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and Gibbon was part of that campaign.
Gibbon Falls in Yellowstone is named after John Gibbon. Howard, go back to Howard. He was the United States commander at the Battle of Big Hole in Montana, where Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce in 1877 were surrounded as they were trying to get to Canada. And our Howard was in command.
Geary.
Mm-hmm. Before, though.
Well, before and after.
Both before and after.
Was he mayor of San Francisco, I think?
Yeah, mayor.
Geary Street is named after him in San Francisco.
I can't remember what it is. I ordered something.
Governor of Pennsylvania after the war.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Territorial governor of Kansas.
Before that's Kansas. That was before.
During the Bleeding Kansas days.
Yeah. See, Washington Roebling was mine.
Oh, okay. How about this? There are people at the Battle of Gettysburg that have famous relatives that you might not know.
Okay, go.
Like, for instance, Rufus Dawes, who was the colonel of the 6th Wisconsin, his son was the vice president of the United States, Charles Dawes. Or Colonel Samuel Jackson of the 11th Pennsylvania Reserves. His grandson is Jimmy Stewart.
Oh, I just read that. Doesn't John Adams have a descendant who fought here?
Probably the Adams lieutenant. He's in the 20th Massachusetts, I think. I can't remember his name.
Does that sound right? I think that sounds
Sumner Payne, though. I mean, his grandfather was Thomas Payne. He's in that Harvard Regiment.
Nixon.
George Nixon
was the 73rd Ohio.
Patton, General Patton.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, Patton's granddad was killed at the Battle of 3rd Winchester, and his grandfather's brother is commander of the 7th Virginian Pickets Charge, Tazewell Patton, and killed climbing over the fence at the Emmitsburg Road. You can see him killed in the movie Gettysburg, as played by Ted Turner. He's the one who brings his hand up to his chest, and the bullet goes in a different place. That's an awesome scene.
Yeah, he has the one line, "Come on, boys." And then he gets shot right away.
And he is credited as playing Tazewell Patton.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And doesn't he have a wristwatch on? or something like that? There was something about a wristwatch. Maybe they had to take him off and do another take.
There was an officer in the 126th New York that founded Scottsdale, Arizona. He was a pastor.
Bob Scottsdale.
It wasn't Bob, I don't think. But he's from Scottsdale. Any listeners?
All right.
I think it depends on, how you qualify it, but there are connections to famous people in the Battle of Gettysburg. Sure. Obviously, when in Pickett Charge, the movie Gettysburg, they highlight that fact that there's a guy in Virginia who's which is grandfather John Tyler, Patrick Henry, and then of course, my favorite, General Lewis Armistead. His uncle was a commander of Fort McHenry during the War of 1812, George Armistead.
Oh, yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. And I usually make a big deal of that on
George
tours.
Sears Green, that Tim mentioned earlier, commanding the brigade of the 12th Corps at Culp's Hill. His great uncle,
something like that,
was Nathaniel Green.
Okay.
From the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. Oh, Lee is related to Light Horse Harry Lee.
Right.
And he's married to
George Washington's step-granddaughter.
There you go. Thank you. I wasn't going to get that.
That's always a difficult one to pull out.
Yeah. So there's a lot of famous people. I mean, you think about it. You got 150 people all in one spot. You're bound to have people that are related to or do something famous. And yeah. All right. Good question. I like that question. Who was that? Danny Musclehed.
Bayard Wilkeson. Sorry about that. The self-amputee on the first day. Am I pronouncing his first name right?
Bayard
Wilkeson. He commanded an artillery battery of the 11th Corps over there at Barlow's Knoll on the first day. I hope I get this right now. His father, of course, was a New York Times correspondent who's going to write about the battle, Sam Wilkerson. But his grandfather founded Buffalo, New York, and the American Colonization Society before the war.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. And just real quick, you said this self-amputee, but explain to people what that means when they don't know the story, let's say.
Oh, you want me to get bloody like for an 8th grade?
Yeah. Go get 8th grade on
So he gets hit right below his right knee by artillery, and he is going to put a tourniquet on, I guess in the form of his officer's sash, and he is going to take a pocket knife and amputate his own leg.
Ugh.
He'll die a few hours later at the almshouse, I guess, in the basement. And it must have been an awful place to be, but there was he was dying, and someone who was helping brought a canteen to him so he could have some water because he was very thirsty. And the guy next to him said something like, "God damn it, give me that." And he gave him the canteen, and he kind of smiled. He tipped his head towards him and smiled as the guy downed the canteen, and then Wilkeson died.
Oh.
So he never got his water.
Poor Bay.
That's how the story goes, though, anyway.
We should mention Daniel Butterfield wrote the song Taps.
Oh, that's a good one.
Which people hear all the time. And I don't, a lot of people don't associate it with a guy that was the chief of staff of the Union Army at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Right, because you don't think musician or any musical. Anything.
And, come on, the name's escaping me. Tim's going to help me, though. One of the conspirators, the guy who attacked Seward. Powell, from the 2nd Florida, was here at Gettysburg.
In fact, I'm talking with Lewis about doing an episode about connections to the Lincoln conspiracy and Gettysburg, because there's a few of them. That's interesting. All right. Quinn 2477 had another question on our last. I already did that one. Never mind. Cut that out. Darthetzkorn asks, why isn't Big Round Top maintained? Is it a monetary issue or the topography?
It's absolutely monetary. So, Big Round Top, what I'd imagine this gentleman's referring to is the fact that Big Round Top used to have something called the Loop Trail. And the Loop Trail was a Park Service brochure. And boy, I don't think there's anybody that knows more about the nature trail and Big Round Top than me. When I was a kid, I was always really into it. And you stop at Big Round Top at the parking lot and you go up and there would be a little brochure container and you open it up, you pull out a brochure, and it was a walking tour around the base of Big Round Top, and it explained to you the nature of the area, the ecology. So you went around and there were like 20 stops, and they had tree stumps cut down, and there was a painted number on the top of the stump, and it would say stop number 1, and it would say, hey, here's an oak tree. Stop number 2, a Kentucky coffee tree. Stop number 3, look at all the rocks. And we'll talk about geology. And you went around the backside of Little Round Top, and you had the famous formation called the Sphinx. And, you could see this rock formation. And they talked about all kinds of things dealing with wildlife, trees, rocks. And it was really big, I guess, in national parks to do these types of things in the 1970s. But then the trail fell into disrepair. The markers, the stop number markers got knocked over. There's still about 5 of them left. If you walk around the Loop Trail, you can't get the brochure anymore. They don't have them at the visitor center. They don't hand them out.
Right.
You can find it online, and you can attempt to do it on your own. Now, besides that, Big Round Top at one time, there was a trail leading to the top of the hill, and there was a tower on it.
Yes.
And so at the time that there was a tower on it, and the first tower was placed on Culp's Hill, I believe, in 1881. I have a video called Big Round Top put out by Pennsylvania Cable Network, and you could watch it. I'm sure I give accurate information if I'm giving the wrong dates, but they put a tower on Big Round Top. And then that tower, the wooden tower, which was 40 feet, was replaced by a metal tower that was 60 feet in 1895. And while the tower was there, the park had a trail to the top of the hill that led to the top of the tower, and they maintained the trail.
Right.
There was we call it the Veterans Path, a trail that went from Little Round Top down across the saddle and up to the top of Big Round Top. And then in the 1940s, they decided the expense of keeping up the trail, which had actual granite steps and then paths that they had to maintain. Trees would fall across it. They had to cut them up.
Right.
The stones were a little bit loose. It was kind of dangerous. They decided to do away with the trail that led to the top. And in the 1940s, they put in a circuitous trail that led to the top of the hill from what is now, the Big Round Top parking area. And then when they put in that trail goes up a steeper part of the hill. It was less maintenance, and they did away with the original trail that went up to the top of the hill. Eventually, the tower was closed. I think the tower was closed in 1968, if I remember correctly. I personally was never in the Big Round Top Tower.
Why did they close it?
It was in disrepair. They didn't have the money to fix it. And vultures were actually really roosting in it. There's a lot of vultures on Big Round Top up there. But basically, the park didn't want to put the money into repairing it. So they did away with the tower. And once they did away with the tower, there was really no great need for people to go to Big Round Top. And because, that people weren't visiting it and it's a lesser part of the battle, there are monuments up there. But the park, if a tree falls across the path, they will send a crew up and cut a hole in the tree or remove the tree. But there's really not much maintenance currently going on with Big Round Top. And with the park, and it's totally understandable. They have a budget and everything is based on monetary concerns. So if they were to fix up the Big Round Top Tower, then there would be a need for them to keep the trail up. So if the tower's not there, then there's no need for the
But you can still, if you can get up there, and I did it once.
Yeah.
It was my first heart attack. And there are you can see the footprints of the old the tower.
Yeah, the tower footprints are still there. And it's worth a climb in the winter. If you go up to the top of Big Round Top in the winter and you look out across the countryside, you get a really great view. And there's some monuments up there that are spectacular.
And one of those monuments is to the 20th Maine. That might surprise people, but the 20th Maine moved to Big Round Top on the night of July 2nd after the famous bayonet charge.
There you go. And that was until Fisher's brigade got up, or
they were there for most. Yeah. Fisher's brigade did come up also on the night of the 2nd. Yes,
but they were. I forgot who told me this. The Fisher was ordered to go up there, and he said, "No, it's dark. I don't know what's there."
Chamberlain,
and then Chamberlain said, "I'll do it."
Chamberlain wrote that.
And do we believe that?
I don't.
Okay. Why don't you believe that?
Because I don't believe anything Chamberlain says.
Oh, anything at all?
That's just my personal opinion.
You know what? We're going to have it. We're going to have to have a special podcast on Tim Smith's view of Chamberlain.
Yeah, and then we get
and then you'll get all sorts of people to ask questions.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Friday live. We'll do it live on Facebook. It'll be Friday Night Fights.
So the point being, what you said there is that there's an argument between the 20th Maine and the Pennsylvania Reserves after the Civil War about, what happened there on the early morning hours of July 3rd, evening hours of July 2nd. So there is some, not just me, there's some debate amongst the veterans as to what happened.
I mean, there's some debate amongst people in the 20th Maine, isn't there, about wasn't there about exactly how the whole bayonet charge went down?
Well, yeah. I mean,
that's a whole other episode.
But keep this in mind for tour guides and historians. We like it when veterans fight with each other because then it creates a record. They actually, in their arguments to each other, they give us details of what happened that we might not necessarily have. So controversial things that happen in letters to the editor written by the various veterans really help our understanding of different aspects of the battle that we wouldn't have without that.
Okay, cool. All right. Bill Darthetzkorn III has been wondering since he was a child, how many more acres could be added to the national park, if any? Are there plans for any future monuments in the future? How many times are you going to say future? Are there any plans for any new monuments in the future?
Well, there's a couple of questions, Aaron. Talking about the boundary. So, in the 1890s, a legislative boundary was established of how big the Gettysburg National Military Park could be. Now, over the years, that legislative boundary has been adjusted. Like, for instance, the Eisenhower National Historic Park really was a way that the park could increase their boundaries without increasing the boundaries of the park because it's the Eisenhower National Historic Site. Even though Eisenhower only ever owned 200 acres and it's 600 acres. But in the 1980s, there was a boundary study and we readjusted the boundary of the park. Now, to get specifically to what he's talking about, for instance, the Civil War Trust purchased the area of Lee's headquarters on Seminary Ridge, but that property is not within the park's legislative boundary. So the Civil War Trust bought a piece of land, and we are unable to give that piece of land to the National Park Service because it's not part of their boundary, and they cannot accept it. So we have to, when I say we, I mean, I'm a consultant in the Civil War Trust. We have to get the Congress to slightly alter the boundary to include that. Okay. And that kind of thing might be added to a rider of a bill for something else in Congress. The Wills House in downtown Gettysburg was a similar proposition where the park was not allowed to accept the Wills House because it was not within the legislative boundary, but it was then later put into the boundary and the park is able to get it. So there is a boundary of how big the park can be. And most of and it's not like the local people want the park to increase in size. They want to keep land out of the park because they want that land to be taxable.
Right.
And so, there's entities fighting against how big the park can become. So what ends up happening is groups that are interested in preservation will buy a piece of property, but they have to take care of it and maintain it. And, with the hope that one day maybe it'll become part of the park boundary.
Now, I had heard somewhere, I forget from who, so I might be wrong here, but I had heard somewhere that, what is it? The park has a little over 6,000 acres now?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. I've heard
maybe in its boundary.
But that's what I'm hearing is that within its boundary there's 6,000 acres, but there's, I think the number was like 18,000 acres of battlefield that is not under the parks or any government.
But what they're saying there is if you create a map of all the area where the battle was fought, you make it into a big rectangle.
Right.
But East Cavalry Field is pretty far away from here. So when they say that, they're just talking about the size of the area where the battle was fought.
Okay.
So, some of that land you would never want to be part of the park boundary.
Area where there was significant action, though, that is not within the park boundary currently.
Yeah.
Could be places like on Doubleday Avenue, Oak Ridge. Yeah. There's modern houses there, including the Doubleday Inn. Yeah. Now, the people who live there and own those properties, they certainly wouldn't want it to become part of the national park. But it was a pretty significant part of the battlefield.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
The end of Steinway Avenue, like where the
Cole Park.
Yeah, exactly. Or even where McDonald's is today,
that
area. I mean, this is pretty significant in terms of Pickett's charge, not necessarily, anyway. So there are some places.
The area of the heaviest fighting of the battle, not owned by the National Park Service, is Seminary Ridge, where the Lutheran Theological Seminary is.
Yeah, that's right.
Heavy fighting around the building. And how about this? There was heavy fighting in the town.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Wasn't there a Colonel Fritz from the 11th Corps who's got like a 600 men in a block of buildings, and they're going to be holding out for like almost 3 hours after the Confederates have stopped after
in the town.
In the town.
So obviously the town's not going to become part of the national park.
No.
So there's inherent difficulties with establishing what should be earmarked as sensitive ground and what should not.
I mean, if you want to displace thousands of people from their homes and businesses, then Kentucky Civil War.
Should we ask before we do that? He asked another question.
Did he? Yes.
So let me, in my interpretation of the role, because I've been here, active in Gettysburg for more than 30 years in different things, that what happens is a monument will be placed, and then they'll announce that there'll never be another monument on the battlefield. And then another monument is placed. Right. And then they announce that there will never be another monument on the battlefield. And then another monument is placed. And they announce that there'll never be another monument on the battlefield. So currently, there's a moratorium against monuments, and there will not ever again be any other monuments until another monument is put
up. Until the next one. What was the last one?
On the battlefield itself, on the fighting lines, the 11th Mississippi.
Okay.
May 27, 2000, it was dedicated.
Okay.
And I was thinking 2000, what's the Delaware and the Maryland?
Those are state monuments on what at the time was the Cyclorama Visitor Center complex.
We were told that area would be a memorial plaza.
There you go.
Where the Cyclorama was?
Where the Maryland State Memorial is and the Delaware State Memorial is.
Okay.
And that can be an area that you could put a monument on. See, every time they put up a monument, when they say they're not allowed to put one up, there's a reason why they're able to do it.
Right. So it's a generational thing.
There's a monument at the Visitor Center to Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
That's not a monument.
But that's not the park.
No,
but that's not
I've
the
been
park.
told. Okay, so here's. I don't want to get into park politics, but I had an issue where I was putting chalk in a rock carving. And the park rangers...
Cobalt Rock?
It was one of the rocks on Cobb's Hill. But I was in a video and I put chalk in a rock carving and I got called into the park office and they said, that you're vandalizing, property because chalk can damage the carving. And first of all, of course, I didn't know the carvings were official monuments.
Right.
But so... Of course, the first thing I did was mention it in the National Summer. They put paint in the names every year. They repaint the names. Isn't that paint harmful to the rock carvings? And then, of course, then I pointed out that at the Visitor Center, they have a monument to Abraham Lincoln, and they let people climb on it and get their picture taken on it. How can it be a monument? The park is telling people you're not allowed to climb on monuments, and yet there's a monument at the Visitor Center and people are able to climb on it. And they told me, that's not a monument.
And it's not the park.
So, I guess our point is that if you have the wherewithal and you need congressional pull, you need somebody in Congress to help you. Do you remember, Bob, who was largely behind the 11th Mississippi Monument being erected?
Well, actually, I gave a tour to a guy named Billy Ross Brown in 1992. And Billy Ross, on that tour, he and his wife and I walked across the field, and he said, damn it, there's going to be a monument to the 11th Mississippi.
But do you remember who his good friend was?
Trent Lott was the Senate Majority Leader at the time.
Yes. So you need congressional power if you want to put up a monument.
And money. John Grisham donated a good piece of the money for that 11th Mississippi Monument. Now, John Grisham didn't want his name necessarily known to be associated with that. Billy Ross told me that at the dedication of the monument. But
now everybody will know.
He just said,
now John Grisham is toast.
He's not toast. He's a good man, a very good man.
Well, no, but it's,
if I can just interject here, I'm
sure.
Almost always looking for a platform to do this. I have been asking about and trying to facilitate another monument. It can't be on the national park legally, apparently, but at the foundation grounds or in the town, it could happen. Just reflecting the African-American experience in some way here. There's not much that is doing that anywhere, but there were thousands of Teamsters behind the Union lines that were African-Americans doing everything they could to help the Union cause. There were slaves in Lee's army that are behind the lines. There is a local, we assume, black man who appears at Culp's Hill in a couple of accounts with a gun and a cartridge box and a belt. And he's going to be apparently shooting at the rebels at Culp's Hill. Now, not a whole lot of historical evidence of that, but boy, if that's true, that man was a brave man. I think his name might have been Randolph Johnson, but I don't know. But I think there needs to be something to reflect the African-American experience here, too.
So if anybody out there has money and connections to a congressman or a senator or a congressman, I guess.
Well, there is a place at Gettysburg Middle School called Unity Park. And not too long ago, they did put up a monument to drummer boys in the Civil War in the Unity Park. And that kind of place.
That's a possibility.
Yeah. And women, at the Evergreen Cemetery.
Elizabeth Thorne.
There's lots of areas around the national park property that you can put up a monument on, a selected piece of ground near the park.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
We got another Lincoln statue within the last few years on High Street.
The guy was here one night, and there's like 30,000 Lincoln monuments around here.
I think there's 6.
You got Perry Como. You have the one.
I usually count 6.
Is it 6? Well, what do we have? You have Perry Como. You have the library.
Okay.
We have the visitor center.
Okay. We have. I didn't count the visitor center one.
No, you got 7.
Then we have one Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln, given that at the Gettysburg College campus.
Oh, okay. I don't go on the campus.
There's a bust of Lincoln from like the waist up behind the train station. Used to be in front of the Wills House.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
On the Pennsylvania Monument, there's Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a bust of him in the National Cemetery.
Right. So that's 7.
So I think we've gotten 7 here.
Yeah. Okay, so 7. I didn't.
Because you weren't counting the visitor center.
I wasn't counting that as a monument.
For reasons which you explained.
All right, let's move on to Kentucky Civil War. He wants this settled once and for all. He says that he has heard that Sickles claimed that his unauthorized move forward to the Emmitsburg Road line saved the Union Army at Gettysburg. Is there any truth to this, or is this just the malarkey of a politician? With all due respect to Joe Biden, in using the word malarkey in there.
Well, I'm probably a pretty bad person to ask this question to, because I'm not a big Sickles fan.
Yes, me
so
neither.
Obviously Sickles would have us believe that his forward movement to the Emmitsburg Road slowed down the Southern Army. And people who are, agree with him in some respect, what they're suggesting is that if Sickles would not have moved forward and slowed down the Southern Army while General Meade sent more reinforcements behind them, that this full force of the Southern attack would have hit Little Round Top, and theoretically Little Round Top would have then fallen. So even if it was against orders, even if it's inadvertent, him moving forward, it bought some time for the Northern Army. A couple things I like to point out is that when Sickles moved his men forward, he never told anyone that he was moving forward. So the idea that he moved forward to buy time for other troops get in position is not true because he never told anybody he was moving forward. It was only after he moved forward, they discovered he moved forward, that they were able to shift reinforcements. And then the second thing is, it really wasn't Sickles, 10,000 men, that slowed down the Southern advance. He was more just like a speed bump. It was the 20,000 reinforcements that General Meade pumped into Sickles' line that actually slowed the Southern Army down. And thirdly, it's almost if with Sickles, if you want to buy into his argument there, it's almost as if Sickles is in a fist fight and he breaks the other guy's hand with his face. So in other words, a lot of men died because of Sickles' forward movement. And then here's the other argument that rarely did people bring this up, but I always find interesting. Let's say Sickles stays where he's supposed to be and occupies Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge. Then McLaws' division moves up to the Peach Orchard, forms a line perpendicular on the Emmitsburg Road, and moves their flank across in front of his line, and he moves off a Little Round Top and drives the Southern Army off the field and ends the battle quickly.
Right.
Yeah. Good.
So if he doesn't move forward, then what did the Southerners do?
Yeah.
When they get to that Peach Orchard, did they charge up the Emmitsburg Road? I don't know.
Well, and if Sickles had stayed where he was assigned, right, and the Confederates did attack him on that line, and maybe they were it was touch and go, and he was pushing them back a little bit.
We just would have reinforced the line from the same spot.
Yeah, exactly. You have the 5th Corps right behind, right? I mean, aren't they kind of down on what's that road?
Yeah,
Granite Schoolhouse Lane. They're kind of in between the two flanks, right?
I mean, they're close.
Yeah. One thing is clear: by Sickles' movement forward, we ended up with the bloodiest day of the battle.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that. I love the analogy of breaking your hand on the face.
Yeah.
I can't remember who told me this one before, but those who say that Sickles was like the bumper absorbing the shock of the Confederate advance, that assumes there's a car behind that bumper.
Right.
And there wasn't.
Yeah.
That was the car that was being hit.
Yeah.
I mean,
and a bumper is put there on purpose in order to do that. Meade didn't put him out there to do that.
Correct. And of course, there will be a line that will form from Little Round Top to Cemetery Ridge, but that wasn't Sickles.
I like that you don't like Sickles. I don't like Sickles. And as my old Italian grandfather used to tell me when I was a little boy, Matty, you show me a man who liked the Sickles, and I'll show you a bigger asshole. So that's what I think about people like Sickles. All right.
We'll get lots of comments about that one.
All right, here we go. Wild Trout _River Junkie asks, where exactly was Longstreet's Corps massed after they arrived at Gettysburg in the early hours of July 2nd? I'm talking about their location upon arrival prior to their infamous march to the right. And this is the last question of the evening, folks.
Okay. Well, we're talking about Hood and McLaws divisions, because Pickett's division comes up on the evening of the second day. But according to the accounts of Hood's division is somewhere, they just crossed Marsh Creek. So they came from Chambersburg on the Chambersburg Pike, and once they crossed over Marsh Creek, they camped in the fields around what we call the Knoxland-Belmont Road. Now, McLaws' division is ahead of them, and McLaws' division crossed Marsh Creek, and then there's every reason to believe that they made a right on, I guess there are a couple ways they could have gotten in position, but I think they make a right on Knoxland Road and probably a left on Old Mill Road.
Okay.
We know that McLaws' division encamps on the high ground between like the Black Horse Tavern and the Her Tavern. And specifically, if you look at a map, around the Her Tavern Road, Old Mill Road intersection, we have a specific account from Joseph Kershaw that's pretty specific as to the place that they encamped for the night on July 1st, morning of July 2nd. And you can go out to that location. He mentions a couple farms. I think he mentions the Har Farm. I think it's spelled like Haar. Off the top of my head, you can check me on that. Haas, it's Haas, Haas. He mentions
Haas,
a farm, and that's near the current intersection of the Her Tavern Road and the Old Mill Road. And then near, if you look at another battlefield map, they're on the hill just beyond what we refer to as the Samuel Hall House, and their line runs down towards the Adam Butt Farm. So actually, not very far from where we are right now on this radio station, but just a little bit up the road here.
And so then the countermarch.
Yeah. So then what they do is they're on top of this hill, facing east, and then on the morning. Early afternoon, I guess we'd say. I couldn't give you a time off the top of my head where they actually start moving, but they will move down the ridge to the west and somehow get onto Black Horse Tavern Road. And then they cross over the Fairfield Road, and then they start marching out the Black Horse Tavern Road to the top of a rise of ground where they can see a little round top, and then they decide to make that counter march. So I guess one thing I'm saying is the spot where they turned around in the counter march from where they started is not that far. We're only talking about less than a half a mile, maybe a little less, where they actually marched. And so the counter march is only the front of the column and is only a short distance. Much too much is made of the counter march.
Yeah.
It really doesn't take that much time, and it's not that many. It's not even the whole division of McCall's that makes them actually turns around. Much too much is made of it.
Okay, so it wasn't that big of a.
It doesn't take up that much time.
Okay. Of
course, I'm sure the people who point to the counter march as taking up time also point out that every moment they lose, into getting into position is important.
Yeah.
But what if they wouldn't have counter-marched, and what if they got into position before Sickles moved forward?
Yeah, right. Okay.
Their whole battle plan was still based on faulty information as to the location of the Union left flank.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, you would agree that if this had happened, the Confederate, or that had happened, or all these ifs and speculative things, they still would have lost, right?
Yeah, that's what I think.
That's what I think too. Sorry, guys, you can't make them win. Yeah. All right. Well, that's about all I have. Bob, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just thank very much, Tim.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. Tim does winter lectures, December, January, February?
Yeah.
Sunday nights at the Farnsworth House?
Yep. Every Sunday night at 6 p.m. we have a lecture on a different obscure Gettysburg topic.
Great. And how do you get tickets? You got to get tickets?
You can just contact the Farnsworth House, or people just show up at the Farnsworth House at 6 p.m. on Thursday. You pay at the door, yeah.
Okay, cool. What is it, $10?
$10.
$10, and you can learn something obscure.
And you can eat and drink while you're listening.
There you go. You can't beat that. All right, so that's what we're going to have to do now, Bob.
Yeah.
Do the park winter lectures during the day on Saturday, and then Sunday night we'll go and do Tim's.
We have a lot of people that do that. They spend the whole day in Gettysburg on Sunday.
Yeah.
Going to lectures in the winter. In summer, we're out on the battlefield.
No, yeah. All right, well, that's pretty cool then. Make sure you check that out next time you come to town. See, there's things to do here in the winter, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just a summer place. And as always, if you want to take a tour with Tim or Bob or any guide, I can put you in touch with a few. So just send me an email at matt@addressinggettysburg.com. Thank you all for listening, and have yourselves a good one until the next time. All right, that's all.
That's right. I like listening to this.